So developing an understanding of culture and how it works for the museum environment does loan itself to the museum environment. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. The topics within this presentation are to familiarize you with the underlying concepts of culture, the three dimensions of interculturality, which are knowledge, skills, and attitudes, and different indices for understanding culture. And you want to be able to begin developing the communication skills needed to function in different kinds of cultures. So the intended student learning outcomes for this presentation are to define culture, understand how cultures differ, and create a framework of ideas that can be applied to understanding the major concepts of intercultural communication. For now, you can do this within the museum environment. So cultural competence is the ability to interact effectively and appropriately in intercultural situations. It is supported by specific attitudes and affective features, skills, and reflections. So here is the main gist of cultural competence broken down into three domains: knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So the knowledge portion of intercultural competence involves all these things: perspective, different interpretations, knowledge of the general dynamics, and language, which is what Americans are really bad at least I am. Skills, they include the ability, these are the skill sets that one wants to develop within oneself. Ability to empathize, tolerate ambiguity, and adopt communication and behavior. And attitudes and openness, that means also having a positive attitude about wanting to learn and understanding intercultural interaction as a way of life and mindfulness. So these are the three domains: knowledge, skills, and attitudes, that embraces the concept or is intertwined with the concept of intercultural competence. So knowledge, skills, and attitudes. These are the areas of knowledge, skills, and attitudes functions in two different ways, depending upon whether you are part of a culture or you come from another culture. Attitudes refer to the valuing of cultural diversity. Acquiring intercultural competence means a positive attitude. The attitude is emotional and affective, and in its core has motivational qualities. One of the attitudes beneficial to intercultural learning is a general openness, and a key factor to intercultural competence is ultimately, when any uncertainties arise, that participants remain open to unknown situations and be tolerant of ambiguity. And what this means about continually reflecting on these experiences, this is for DLIS students, well, for St. John students within the Division of Library and Information Science. Our external accrediting agency requires lifelong learning, a demonstration of lifelong learning. This is what this is all about. So the attitudes, which is reflective of one domain of intercultural competence, the attitudes are meant to develop continuously and change over the course of one's life. So your reading is going to go into all the stuff a lot more. But these are the main points of intercultural competence, which I was hoping that you would take away from this. It develops dynamically in different domains. It's neither a state nor a direct result of a discrete learning experience. So you can't learn this in a classroom, basically. Culture's in flux, and so because culture is in flux, you are going to continuously evaluate and reevaluate how you do with updating yourself on being competent within different cultures. And it is a complex and multidimensional thing or behavior to adopt. And the acquisition of intercultural competence can be construed as continuous, dynamic, and one that involves diverse dimensions while developing and enriching oneself within the three domains of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So this is what lifelong learning is all about. There are constructive interactions, and there are two parts of constructive interactions that Alexandra and I would like you to bring about from this class. Valued objectives and avoiding or violating cultural rules. This is an external outcome. IC, or intercultural communication, as understood within the pamphlet that I'm about to show you, leads to interaction among those participating in intercultural situations, which y'all are doing in our virtual exchange class, our third space, where you're developing a museum exhibit as in operating within that third space as curators. Appropriate interaction, here are the three domains or definitions of what it means to be appropriate or take appropriate intercultural communicative actions. Let's see. So just read those. Effective interaction. Here are the three main takeaways for effective interaction. It principally connects intercultural competence to the model of purposive, rational action. In other words, you assess the environment you're in, evaluate what actions are appropriate based upon those actions you see and view from others, and then act on those actions. Task-related determinations can are used as a goal that guide our actions. And here's an example of what it means to have an effective interaction. So for one, to develop a comprehensive cultural knowledge of intercultural communication, conflict and synergy management skills, a comprehensive knowledge about those cultural elements that affects one's own and others' interaction is important for behavior that is interculturally competent, and we don't always see these, right? We're not always aware about how we're doing something until sometimes it's pointed out to us. Like, it's my understanding, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, that you're not supposed to have a hand in your lap when you're eating at the dinner table. Both hands are supposed to be present on the table. And Americans put one hand down on their lap all the time and eat, right? And the question that a German might ask is, what are you doing down there, right? So totally inappropriate in the German culture, way of life in American culture. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I learned in my German classes. So intercultural reflection and empathy. This is the third domain, or part of the third domain is empathy. So you're going from a narrow to a wider point of view in terms of what your worldview looks like. And this requires a change in perspective, meaning that the way you grew up within your own home is not necessarily how the rest of the world operates. To find out how the rest of the world operates, be open and go into a situation with wanting to learn why and how things work in that culture, and realize that your one way of growing up is one of many ways. So be open and broaden your worldview. That's what brings about empathy. So we talk about universalism versus relativism in the in the PDF that I'm about to show you. Here are some takeaways. Intercultural competence does not take away or do away with cultural differences. It can sometimes reinforce them. But by demanding a shift of reference and by expanding one's horizons or information horizons about the understanding of other cultures and other situations present in those other cultures that you're not familiar with, it can help you understand other people better. That's what the reading says. So we do not have an intercultural communication dogma or domain that is globalized, but we need to, because the world can just sometimes be a very very mean place, right? So with this class, we want to see, within at least a museum environment, how the idea of intercultural competence broadens your worldview and helps you expand your information horizons about how other people operate in the world. So when we're operating within the museum environment, this is all important, and we're on the precipice of figuring out what that looks like. But first, let me get you the pamphlet. The PowerPoint I just showed you comes from this pamphlet. It's uploaded, I think, into the Padlet. Intercultural competence, the key competence in the 21st century. This is where I got the chart about the 3 domains of intercultural competence. It's a reflection, knowledge and skills, attitudes, and the external and the internal outcomes. But knowledge, skills, attitudes, those are the 3 skill sets that coalesce into internal and external outcomes: intercultural reflection and constructive interaction. So the more you gain or develop an understanding of intercultural knowledge and skills, and the more you're able to develop a positive attitude that leads to more the valuing of other cultures, which you do by not talking people down and not devaluating a culture, but expanding your information horizons on how other cultures work. The effects are one internal and one external. The internal outcome is within yourself and with your own brain as you change the files and folders in your head in terms of how the world works. That's intercultural reflection. And as a result of those intercultural reflections, that you gauge yourself in terms of your actions or your thoughts. Those thoughts precipitate the actions, which are the external outcomes. So how are you constructively engaging with other people from other cultures? That's what this whole graph is talking about. So, and the rest of the information that I got from the PowerPoint is straight from here. So please go ahead and start reading this. And then within the context of your museum exhibit brochure, you might want to look at, there's a handout, and I also added a link. So Utah has done a pilot study pre-post about the social impact of museums on the museum visitor. And the one interesting thing that they are starting to measure are intercultural competence. And this one study on pre-post, they did a pre and post on museum visitors. So prior to going into a museum, they asked museum visitors a set of questions that are centered around intercultural competence, and then a post test asking the museum visitors the same questions centered around intercultural competence, but asking them to measure or answer these questions after they visited a museum. So museums are starting to ask how they can increase the intercultural competency of a museum visitor within their environment, within their museum environment. And some of the questions that they asked, sample questions. And these are things that you might want to think about. These are questions that you might want to think about when constructing your own museum exhibit and go to publish it in the brochure. Increased cultural competence questions include, I learn new things from people that are different from me. All right, so you might want to turn the statement into a question. When developing your exhibit and the narrative around your exhibit, how can the museum visitor, in this case the virtual museum visitor, learn new things from people that are different from oneself? 2, I am able to see things from the point of view of others. Within your museum brochure, you might want to ask this question when constructing your exhibit: How is a museum visitor able to see things from the point of view of others? A third question for measuring intercultural competence within your own museum exhibit. This study asked, I have the ability to sympathize with the feelings of others. When creating your museum exhibit, you might want to ask the question, how does our museum exhibit enable one, or a museum visitor, to sympathize with the feelings of others? Maybe you can get at that within your groups. And a fourth question that the Intercultural Competence Pilot Study measured was, I get along with others who are different from me. So you might want to ask yourself, within while constructing your museum exhibit within your questing groups, how can we demonstrate that we get along with others who are different from yourself? And another thought came to me too. In challenge 3, you're going to be asked to reach out to support groups. So ask this question yourself again later on when you go to reach out to your support groups and asking them to describe your objects. How does your museum exhibit, or in the narrative centered around the exhibit, demonstrate that you are able to get along well with others who are different from yourself? Another question asked by this Utah pilot study, this Utah Museum pilot study, was, I recognize my deep held beliefs when interacting with others. This is what we're talking about with, this is an example of internal, and the internal competence. I don't know if you're going to be able to get at this within your narrative when you're constructing your museum exhibit, but you might want to be thinking, consciously thinking to yourself when writing your narratives around your museum object and creating your exhibits, is how are you able to recognize your deeply held beliefs when interacting with others? Maybe that'll come out with your final quest group museum exhibits, right? Or maybe it'll come out in challenge 5 when all 9 groups, when all 9 of your quest groups have to work together in figuring out the organization of your museum brochure. Another question that this pilot study, museum pilot study, asked centered around the concept of intercultural competence. When interacting with others, I recognize their deeply held beliefs. Are you going to be able to demonstrate something like this, a concept like this, within your museum exhibit? Can you demonstrate the fact that you acknowledge somebody else's beliefs when writing your narratives for your museum exhibit? And finally, the final question in this one-pager for the Utah pre-post social impact on museum visitors, centered around intercultural competence, is, I am open to multiple perspectives. By all means, this should be one of the most easy to get at, but most difficult to agree on between and among your quest team and support team groups. However, through your descriptive tags for challenge 2, from your quest team objects, and then from the descriptive tags again in challenge 3, when you ask your support teams for additional ideas in terms of how they see your museum exhibit, this could lend to the idea of integrating multiple perspectives within your museum exhibits. So I hope that this is helpful for information for the context within which Alexandra and I are asking you to gain an understanding of intercultural competence within the museum environment and how it works through the construction of your museum exhibits. All right, so that's enough for now. It's almost 20 minutes that I've spoken, and I apologize for taking so long, but thank you for your time.